Marion Diay is a pretty huge name in French literature. She has won multiple awards in France and in the UK, and this is actually the first book of hers that I've ever read. Self-Portrait in Green was originally published in France in 2005, and then it was published in the US in translation by Jordan Stump in 2014, and it was published by Two Lines Press, who I'm a huge fan of. They publish some really great stuff, and it's taken 7 years for it to finally be published in the UK. I'm not sure why that is, but it's been published by Influx Press, and Influx Press are also a fantastic independent publisher, and it couldn't have really gone to a better press. It is the same Jordan Stump translation, and this is my, as I said, first time reading Marion Diay and reading Self-Portrait in Green. Now, from what I've read online, and the blurb references this as well, this book, Self-Portrait in Green, is what happened when Marion Diay was asked to write a memoir. It says in the blurb that it is Ndiaye's brilliant subversion of the memoir, written in diary entries with lyrical prose and dreamlike imagery. Now, it's not really written in diary entries, that's a little bit misleading. Every chapter and sometimes subchapter begins with a date, and those dates are not always chronological. They're always between the years of 2000 and 2003, but it's not really a diary. I don't think that's the right word for it. They are snippets of time, but they're not written in any kind of diary format as you might expect from something like, I don't know, Dracula. That's the first one that comes to mind. It's not like that. What it is, however, is an incredible piece of literature. So Self-Portrait in Green is supposed to be a memoir, but it really does read like a very surreal piece of fiction, and I think that that adds a lot of weight to the idea of it being a memoir, which I'll talk about in a sec. The book begins with La Garonne, which is a river, and it passes through a small town in which she, or her character, I guess, lives. And the river floods. The river is ready to burst its banks. It's 2003, and it is rising and rising and about to flood and destroy ordinary life in the area. And it feels mystical. It feels, the way she describes it is as if the river is destined to flood, or it was preordained that it would flood, it was predicted to flood. There's a certain mystical quality to this river and this flooding and her attitude and relationship towards it. And it really begins a solid basis to her relationship with everything around her. This approach to fate and destiny and things being preordained, this idea carries us all the way through the book. What's interesting immediately about the book is that our protagonist, who I'm going to call Marie, she is constantly relating herself to other people, including La Garonne, the river. She's always talking about other people and the river, but really everything that she says is about herself. And in that respect, it's a memoir. Let me go back a bit. I'll explain what I mean. When the book begins, we have the river. Very quickly, she describes the river, and there's this sense of dread. Then we move on, and the first part of the book is a very, very, very skinny book. It's about 80 pages. The very, very first part, after the river, she's driving through the countryside, and she's got 4 children in the car. They're all her children. And she's driving them to school. And every morning she notices, she looks out the window of her car and she sees this little cottage with a garden in the countryside. And in the garden is a woman wearing green. And she sees this woman. And then one day she's driving along with her kids and she asks them, "What do you see?" She stops the car and she looks into the garden and she asks the kids what they see. And they don't see anything. And yet Marie sees a woman in green staring back at her. It's really creepy. At first I was thinking, I thought this was supposed to be some sort of twist on the memoir, but it feels like a horror story. It's genuinely creepy. I sent a shiver straight down my spine. It's a really eerie moment in the book. And from here, there is a surrealness that continues to build. And that part of the book, this woman in green in the garden who may or may not be there and is hiding behind a banana tree, she may not be real, but that's still the least surreal part of the book. As the book goes on, the surreal quality builds and builds. Now, I like surreal literature. I like a lot of books that take a fantastical, strange, impossible attitude towards life setting, character relationships. I like that stuff. It might be minor. Something like Haruki Murakami's books are pretty minor when it comes to their surrealness. They're odd and they're strange, but you just kind of get on with it. And then you get intense surrealism. And the best example I can think of is Kobo Abe. Kobo Abe was quite a legend of 20th century Japanese literature, but his books were very, very Kafkaesque, but they took the idea of Kafka and just twisted them with surrealness, as if it was Kafka living in a Dali painting. And that kind of surrealism, depending on your mood, can either really, really affect you in a positive way, or it can kind of frustrate and exhaust you. And I like Kobo Abe. I like the books that I've read. One was particularly headache-inducing, but I still felt that there was a quality to it that I admired, and I still enjoyed my time with it. I liked being able to try to pick apart the themes and the ideas and the inspiration of it, like looking at a surrealist painting. Depends on what you feel. This is the absolute best example of that I have ever found. Self-Portrait in Green is surreal, but it speaks to you. Like I said, these Kobo Abe books, some you get on with, and some it feels like looking at a Dali painting and you have to pull meaning out of it. What do you feel when you look at it? What do you feel when you interact with the story? This is very much a book about feeling. The surrealness of it is intense, but absolutely beautiful. It carries you away. So after our first encounter with this woman in green, the woman in green becomes an integral part of her story and her narrative all the way through, flitting between any time between 2000 and 2003. We spend quite a lot of time in 2001. She's spending time with her friends, people she knows, her mother, her sisters, the women in her life. Some of them are strangers, some of them are friends of friends. But each chapter kind of deals with an interaction either directly with a woman in green, or an interaction with a friend who knows a woman in green, who talks about a woman in green, and the concept of the woman in green is haunting her. And she is frightened of it. And yet, all of the women in green that she either interacts with directly or just hears about and develops a mental image of, none of them have anything in common. And that's when you begin to realize, as I said before, this is really a book about her. What they have in common is her. They are symbols of things that she has a negative association with. That's what it felt like. Every time she sees a woman in green, interacts with a woman in green, there is something about that woman that perhaps she doesn't like, perhaps something she's afraid of, or she judges harshly, something that she's angry at, something that she is worried about. It feels like these women, and they're often older than her, it feels like these women represent possible futures, or ways that her life could have gone or might still go. It feels like these are women who represent things that she doesn't like about herself, or that she's worried about becoming in the future. Maybe you can relate to this. Maybe you've met people who are your age or a generation above, a few years older, whatever, and you think, God, I hope I don't end up like that. I hope that's not the life that I'm moving towards. And you think I need to steer away from that kind of person. You might not dislike them as a person, you just think that's not the kind of life for me. You've probably felt this at some point, and that's what a lot of this book feels like. But the surrealism remains, because these women in green almost take on a ghostly quality. The best example is a woman in green who supposedly is already dead. It is a story told to Marie by a friend, where there's a guy, I think his name is Ivan. He was married to a woman who supposedly hanged herself in the basement. And Ivan and his new partner are walking through a shopping mall one day, and they physically bump into the wife who supposedly hanged herself. And she recognizes them and says, "Hey, how are you?" And they start a conversation, a very brief one. And then they walk away and think, didn't she die? Doesn't make any sense. And then Ivan's new partner is meeting up with this hanged woman in green. They bump into each other in the shopping mall a few times. Very peculiar. And so there's obviously something about this woman that speaks to Marie in a very kind of emotionally primal way. Then there's the woman in the garden, as I mentioned, very, very much later in the book. I don't think this is the kind of book that you can spoil, so I don't mind talking about any part of it. Marie is talking later on about her mother slowly transforming into a woman in green. And these women might be wearing green dresses, green nail varnish, green makeup, they might have green hair, there's something green about them. And that greenness is simply a visual metaphor for something that Marie does not like. And it's fascinating. What makes it even stranger in a way is the fact that the least surreal aspects of the book are the 2 or 3 chapters where she interacts with her dad. Moments where she talks to her dad or goes to see her dad or thinks about her dad have a very grounded, level quality to them. And that's very interesting because those moments clearly show a very stretched and strained relationship between her and her dad. So it's not like her and her dad are a respite from the chaotic surrealism of her relationship with other women. That's not the case. Actually, it's quite the opposite. So it feels like, in a way, this book is perhaps a midlife crisis. It is her afraid. It's her frightened of a possible future or afraid of any kind of mirror of herself that she could see in other women. That's how it feels. It's very, very difficult to describe this book without projecting. I am just projecting my feelings. This is a surreal book. It is a painting. It is a memoir, but also not at all. It is a complete and utter twist. Ndiaye has made her own twist on the memoir, and this is what she's come out with. It's really up to you what you see, what you feel when you read this. So everything I've just said in the last 10 minutes is just my projection. This is how I feel. This is my interpretation. More than anything, surreal literature really, really feels like you are looking at a painting that has no specifics. A painting, the meaning of which can be projected onto it rather than gleaned from it. That's what it feels like. You are projecting your feelings, your meaning. What do you take from this? And the book doesn't end in any real satisfying way. It is a snapshot of 3-4 years of a life where the idea of a woman in green is a haunting image to her. It's fascinating. What I also loved so dearly about this book is the fact that although it's quite strange and surreal, the language is so calm and quiet. It's not too loud. It's not too boisterous. The language in this book treads a careful line between ordinary, grounded, almost bland language and a little bit of poetic lyricism. Jordan Stump has done an astonishing job at translating this book. There are great, great literary translators of every language into English. I have my favourites. From Korean to English, I love all of the translation works of Sora Kim Russell. From Japanese to English, there's Polly Barton, who's relatively new talent and just incredible at what she does. And my absolute favourite Japanese to English translator is Stephen Snyder. French to English, I have to keep an eye on Jordan Stump. This guy, his translation is absolutely brilliant. And this is the first translated book by Jordan Stump that I've ever come across, and I'm immediately a huge fan. This is a really astonishing piece of translation, so any French novel that you find that's translated by Jordan Stump, the translation at least is going to be absolutely gorgeous. It really, really feels like mature, considered, satisfying translation. And what also helps is the book, as I said, is 80 pages. I read it in a day, and that day was very, very emotionally affecting because I seemed to feel a lot for this character, for this story. I certainly felt a relationship with her. I felt what she was feeling. I think I could relate to her struggles, her feelings, her fears, her paranoia. This is a book of paranoia, and I get paranoid, and I get worried, and I get anxious, and I felt a lot of that here, and I thought I felt a little less lonely, I guess, in my head, a little less lonely in my thoughts while I was reading this. Very, very relatable, but not relatable at all because it's surreal. As I said, surrealism is about projecting yourself onto it, and what I projected gave me a sense of satisfaction and camaraderie with her. Really amazing. So, if you're from the States, you might have read this book years ago. If you speak French, and you read French, again, this was published quite a while ago. But now, in the UK, thanks to Influx Press, we can read this. Fantastic. I recommend it wholeheartedly. So, if you have already read it, because you're from France or the States, great, let me know what you think. And if you haven't read it yet, pick it up. It's absolutely fantastic. Self-Portrait in Green by Marie Ndiaye. Amazing book. Alright, subscribe for books.